the mid-budget B thriller. It's a fascinating subgenre, one that I love dearly, but for me also one of the hardest to evaluate because it's usually not trying to be a masterpiece, but as long as it fulfills that bare minimum requirement of entertaining you, you're like, yeah, that was pretty good. Well, Plane is throwing its hat into the ring of January releases this weekend, and I will never forget seeing the trailer for this movie ahead of seeing Glass Onion in theaters. And it's this intense action film starring Gerard Butler, and then the title pops up and it's just Plane. As funny as Glass Onion was, that might have been the most that the audience laughed during that screening. Because yeah, it's just called Plane, and aptly so. Gerard Butler plays Brody Torrance, a pilot who gets negligently told to fly through a storm to save time on New Year's Eve, too. This is a New Year's movie. And when they, of course, fall victim to a lightning strike, he has to make a risky landing in the Jolo Island cluster in the Philippines, a place that's infamous for being overrun by separatists and militias and very dangerous to foreigners. When rebels take most of the passengers hostage, the only person that Torrance can count on for help is Mike Colter's Louis Gaspar, an accused murderer who is being transported by the FBI. This was co-written by the writer of The Contractor, starring Chris Pine, and directed by Jean-Francois Richet, who directed Bloodfather and the Assault on Precinct 13 remake. So I didn't have the highest expectations for this. I don't know anyone who does. And while I wasn't blown away by Plane, I was actually very pleasantly surprised. I had a ton of fun, and depending on who you are, I think you'll have a great time with this movie. Basically, if you like corny 90s or early 2000s action thrillers. In another universe, this is written and directed by Michael Mann and is like next level. But basically what you're getting here is by the numbers, part airplane, part hostage, part like a good cop, bad cop thriller that is executed competently and with just enough personality to feel fresh and engaging. It's an in-the-moment popcorn film. Like, I don't think anyone is gonna remember this movie until they see it pop up on cable, but my audience clearly enjoyed it. They were very energetic, laughing, there were some hell yeahs, and it got claps after. There weren't even claps after my Avatar screening. America loves mid-popcorn thrillers. It's not that hard, Hollywood. And we'll get into the weaker aspects of the film, but what mostly makes it enjoyable is the charismatic leads, the action, and the pacing. This movie's 100 minutes long, it like whips by, and it manages to be really tense a lot of the time. If you have a fear of plane crashes, consider not watching this. I thought the crash scene was so real feeling and well done. And I'm coming off of my own scare that I just had coming back to DC, and I actually love flying. I think that turbulence can be fun, but this was turbulence like I've never experienced. It was prolonged and the plane stopped making noise. I felt sick to my stomach. I was ready to hold the hand of the lady next to me. I was like, oh my god, we're going down. I lived, obviously, much to the dismay of my enemies. But that crash scene really makes you feel that nauseating uncertainty and is one of several stellar moments in the movie. The action from there stems from this inherently tense situation they're in. They have no idea where they landed, they have no way to communicate with anyone, and they think they landed in this Jolo Island cluster, which means they could be in life-threatening danger at any second. They don't know where the threat is or could be coming from. It sometimes even reminded me of a zombie movie in that they had to go as long as they could without using guns to not attract attention, and often Call of Duty in the stealthier moments and the shootouts and like what kind of resources can you find on the island. And that tension is made even more palpable with a lot of handheld action that grips you more in some moments than others, and I honestly wouldn't call any of it memorable, but again, it's effective in the moment. I mentioned the crash scene. There's one hand-to-hand, just brute force fight that's filmed with an interesting up-close and personal tracking shot, and in the climax, it gets pretty sick. There are rifles being used that are just blasting people up against cars. They paid their dues by then, so it just kind of goes all out at the end. And there was more of what I call intimate gore than I thought there would be, and that's basically like throats getting slit. Mike Colter is wielding a hammer like a freaking badass at one point. The crowd loved that. And in between, you're getting something that is more subdued than you might expect. It's not non-stop over-the-top action. And some people might be disappointed that it's not as stupid and crazy as the name might suggest. But for me, that surprising groundedness is what allowed me to be more immersed in it because I could convince myself that this was something that could really happen. Maybe like the craziest story ever played up for dramatic effect. And they do test your suspension of disbelief a few times, but I found it just believable enough to not be like, this is silly. And part of that, a big part of that, is that Gerard Butler's character doesn't have this like miraculous military background that makes him invincible, which is way overused in movies like this, and I was actually worried about, but they didn't use that. He felt like a guy who just steps up to be a hero. The most disappointing aspect for me, though, was the character work, which again, I expected to be very cliche, and it was, but what I was most shocked at was how underused Mike Colter was. I was like, what the heck? You're advertising him as half the movie and we learned practically nothing about him. He is ex-military, but we don't really get to know him besides the facts about why he's indicted for murder. There is interesting payoff there, but it doesn't get more than a couple lines. It's just very, very thin storytelling. Gerard Butler is a single dad. He's talking to, or trying to talk to, his daughter throughout the film. He's like the self-insert everyman. He and Mike Colter are both fun to watch and clearly committed. They have great chemistry. I just wanted a lot more between the two of them. So if you're looking for deep emotional catharsis with Plane, I'd say watch another movie. There was also some shoddy acting otherwise, especially with the other passengers, but I will say that Tony Goldwyn and Yosin An were standouts as the airline crisis manager and Captain Torrance's co-pilot, respectively. I thought they were great. I'm also very curious about where the budget went for this movie, not because it looks bad, but because they spent $50 million on this, and it feels very much like a $20 to $30 million movie. It's relatively small scale. So I'm wondering like how much Gerard Butler got paid. But it was produced entirely in Puerto Rico, which is pretty cool, and it is set in this Jolo Island cluster, which is a real area that is known for being very dangerous to foreigners, but the Filipino rebels still get the very cliche treatment. So again, it's not trying to be a masterpiece, but I had a fun time at the theater with this, and of these kind of tight thrillers that have come out recently, what comes to mind for me is Fall and Beast. This was definitely my favorite of the three. By a small margin, but still my favorite. Clearly, the cast was having fun. It felt like everyone cared about it. Some people aren't gonna buy into it. I can already see the Letterboxd reviews that are calling it Plane, P-L-A-I-N, but I'm going to give Plane 3 out of 5 stars. It's a high 3. I did consider giving it 3.5 stars just because I enjoyed myself, but I don't want to let being pleasantly surprised cloud my judgment. This is a perfectly serviceable action thriller that has some great adrenaline-filled moments and will keep you entertained for an hour and 47 minutes, no more, no less. Regardless, I will continue to champion mid-budget thrillers like this. I would recommend it for the theater, even more so than something like Megan, just because the action feels so fitting for the big screen. But those are my thoughts on Plane, guys. Hashtag Plane Sweep. Let me know if you plan on checking it out in theaters and streaming, maybe not at all. Don't forget to like and subscribe and keep an eye out for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.